Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz, and we're in the middle of People April, when I and my fellow hosts are encouraging people to read books about people, so biography and autobiography and letters and journals and diaries and so on. And I always like in People April to kind of reflect on the enormous variety there is in biographical and autobiographical writing. And this year, I thought I would think about graphic memoirs and graphic biographies and what a lovely format that is for biographical and autobiographical writing. And I have read this People April 3 that are new to me, graphic memoirs. And I'm going to talk about those 3, and then also like 3 others that are particular favourites of mine, so that if you were someone who was sort of, I think if you're someone who's enjoys a memoir but hasn't yet got into reading comic books, then graphic memoirs are a great way in. And there are some particularly strong ones around that could be worth your time. So which did I read that were new to me this People April? So first, there's this one, Relish, My Life in the Kitchen by Lucy Knisley. Now, this is, in effect, the story of her childhood and young adulthood through food and meals and cooking. It's quite episodic, and each section ends with a recipe that's we're shown kind of how to do it in pictures. There we go. It's funny, it's charming. I suppose it's drawing on the fact that if we think about nostalgia, we think about how smells bring memories back to us. But of course, tastes can do the same thing, and that's what she's conveying. And food was a really important part of her childhood because her mother was a cook and so on. And it's a very sweet book. The drawing style, lovely and clear. She's very good at conveying kind of body language and how people move, and in as much as expression in her illustrations. It wasn't a sort of blow you away groundbreaking book, but an enjoyable one to read. The second one that I read was probably more striking to me, and that's NonNonBa by Shigeru Mizuki, translated from the Japanese by Jocelyne Allen. Now, this is a much more sort of complex story, I guess, although it's also a story about childhood and kind of growing up and things that are important to Mizuki as a child. Let me tell you more. Now, he was born in 1922, and he was a kind of, as a child, he was a bit of an artistic prodigy. His teachers were really impressed by his drawing. He wasn't an academic child, but his drawing was he had a real natural talent, I suppose. He grew up in a small town, a port in Japan, not a big place, quite a poor community, and he had a very close relationship with an elderly neighbour who was like a kind of surrogate grandmother to him, I guess. And she used to tell him stories about yokai. What are yokai? Yokai is the Japanese word for kind of supernatural beings, spirits, ghosts, monsters, demons, those beings that were key to kind of traditional Japanese folklore. And Mizuki was fascinated by these, and he would come to draw on those stories that he was told as a child later in life, when he became, after the Second World War, kind of one of the founders, originators of manga as a genre, and specifically, he was involved in making yokai a sort of a subgenre of manga, and drawing on those sort of Japanese folklore traditions in manga writing. He also, as it happens, was originator or a key kind of member of another movement within manga, and that's, and I need to get the name right, Gekiga, which is dramatic manga, so more realistic stories about real themes and ideas, and often biographical or autobiographical. And he brought those two threads, yokai and Shigeru, together when he wrote this. It was published in 1977, and it's a kind of autobiographical book about his childhood, that is full of both realistic detail of his childhood, but also of yokai. There's one approaching that for sure, and others are more sort of sort of monster-like or demon-like. Now, of course, I can't find a suitable page to show you, but I will. In this story, he's explaining, I suppose, about his childhood, about how NonNonBa, this elderly neighbour, sort of told him these stories. And in the book, the yokai are real to him as a child, but I suppose they also work as, how would you describe it? Kind of like metaphors, I suppose, for some of his childhood experiences and the challenges that he was facing and upsetting things that happened to him. Kind of, NonNonBa helps him make sense of them through telling him stories about yokai, and then the yokai in this book kind of express some of those childhood emotions, strong emotions of childhood. I loved it as a book. The drawing style took a bit of getting used to for me, I have to say, because it's this interesting combination of kind of very quite sort of detailed and realistic sort of backdrops and scenery with very stylized human figures and yokai figures. I found that quite unusual and different for me, although I think perhaps you wouldn't if you were more familiar with the manga as a genre. He wrote this in the 70s. It was only translated into English in 2012. Although Mizuki's sort of was sort of key to the development of manga and is very, very well known in Japan, it's only since around 2010 or so that he's become sort of popular and known in the English-speaking world. And then he actually died in 2015. A few of his books are becoming available in translation. Was really revealing about the small-town Japan in the 1930s. There's this very sad story in it about someone who becomes his friend who died of tuberculosis, and another friend who is being sold to a geisha house. It's absolutely fascinating and a lovely book. Third one that I read, also fascinating and a very lovely book, but completely different again, although again about childhood and coming of age. So this is When Stars Are Scattered. It's by Victoria Jamieson and Omar Mohamed. It's kind of like a collaboration, I suppose, between Jamieson and Mohamed, because it's Mohamed's story, his autobiographical tale of his childhood, but she used his his stories, his explanation about that to write and draw the book. So, as I say, a joint effort. And it's kind of like middle grade or early young adult, I suppose. Yeah, more. You know, it would. You could read it as a 9 or 10-year-old, but it can be read and enjoyed by someone of any age. I came to read it because it's the current month's choice for the middle grade and YA strand of Reading the Globe, and I'm hosting the sort of contemporary fiction strand with Katja, but Jack of Spread Book Joy is sharing this strand, and I'm so pleased that led me to read this book. It's a beautiful book about quite a tragic story, although with elements of hope, I suppose, which is lucky as it's sort of middle grade. Omar and his brother Hassan were displaced as small children from their village in Somalia by the civil war there. Their father was killed and they were separated from their mother in the confusion of an attack on their village. They had to flee. They walked for days. They wind up in a vast refugee camp in Kenya and live out the rest of their childhood and teenage years in that refugee camp. And a woman, another Somali refugee who's lost her children, kind of takes on the role of foster mother for her. But essentially, Omar becomes responsible for caring for and bringing up his younger brother Hassan, who is learning disabled and has epileptic seizures. And in the context, the very, very challenging context of the camp and as a refugee, the drawing style of this book is rather gorgeous, but also like really successfully conveys, I think, the scale of the camp, the vastness of it, and how very little that they have in any sort of material sense. You know, they are, yeah. It's a very bleak existence. Although children being children, they make friends, they find things to enjoy, and appreciation of the world around them and people, and hang on to some hope that one day maybe they will be reunited with their mother. The abiding thing that I think you take from this book is the endless waiting that the life of the refugee. You know, people spend their whole lives in these camps, and some will, never leave. But they can never take part in the life of the country that they're living in either. They never get back to their own country. They never get rehomed elsewhere, and they can't take up jobs and lives in the country that they're living in. It's a very moving book, but with a lot of warmth and an element of hope. There will be a live show about it hosted by Katja and Jack, so look out for that if you're curious. Not sure the date of it yet. So those are the three that I read for this People April. But as I say, I think that graphic memoirs are my favourite form of comic, and a great way for getting into the sort of the comic book genre. And if you are an enthusiastic reader of comic books, do recommend to me your favourite graphic memoirs and graphic biographies. But I'm going to mention now three that I think are kind of exceptional examples of the graphic memoir book, and that I would say anyone could read and enjoy. Now, one is on the shelf behind me, and I just had to reach for it. Here we go. by Marjane Satrapi. Wonderful graphic memoir about her childhood, growing up in Iran under at the time of the Islamic Revolution, the early days of the sort of Iranian regime as it continues to this day. It's moving, it's funny, it gives you a whole different understanding of Iranian culture and Iranian women in particular. It's very bold graphic style, monochrome, really strong, I suppose. It's very much a book where you get as much from the pictures as the words, which is how it should be, a graphic memoir, I think. But you become intimately attached to Margie and her experiences and her I suppose her quest for a degree of self-determination and how being a woman in Iran at that time, a girl in Iran, sort of constrained that, and how she deals with that. Highly recommended. It was originally published, I should say, it was originally published in French in around sort of 2000, and then in the English translation in 2003. And I should tell you the translator, because I always say the translator, and I've failed to do that, and it's not obvious on the cover, which is poor, isn't it? Well, I'm going to have to put it, because I don't want to keep you waiting, I'm going to have to put it in the show notes, because I don't think she translated it herself. Perhaps she did, I'll check. Second one I want to recommend, completely different, although also about childhood and growing up, and with some sort of complex issues in it, I suppose. I don't have a copy of to wave at you, but that's Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. Now, Bechdel is American. This is her book, it's from 2006, about growing up in rural Pennsylvania, and where her family ran a funeral home. Though her father was also an English teacher. I'm trying to remember what her mother did, but But this book is really about her relationship with her father, and he looms large in the book. It's also a book about sexuality, family dynamics. It's, a really beautifully drawn, beautifully written, quite challenging, I suppose, in its content. I think it's often both Persepolis and that are often banned books. If you're a reader of interested in reading books that have been banned or challenged, it's non-linear in the plot. The drawings are, as in Persepolis, absolutely crucial to your understanding of her childhood, of the emotional situation she was in. They're very detailed backgrounds. You see the house and the funeral home both feature a lot in the books, as do there's maps. There's intimate detail in the drawings of the places of her childhood. And then the people are very strongly drawn, often from kind of quite unusual angles or perspectives. Not highly coloured, again, basically sort of monochrome. Highly recommended. The third and final one I'm going to recommend is much more up to date, and that's from 2022, and it's Ducks by Kate Beaton. And it's Ducks, 2 Years in the Oil Sands. And she's a Canadian writer. It's a coming of age book again, I suppose, but not about childhood. It's about young adulthood. She graduated with kind of big student debt, and went back to small place in Nova Scotia where she lived and realised, what am I going to do to pay off this student debt and have, be able to have a life? And so she decides to go and work on a sort of temporary basis in the Canadian oil industry, in the oil sands of Alberta. And this is her memoir of her time working in the oil sands. It's a very harsh world for a young woman to go and work in. It's a world of big machinery and environmental damage, and where women make up only 1 in 50 of the workforce. It's a very male world. She experiences a lot of sexual harassment. And yet she writes about it with a kind of an empathy towards her male colleagues, an understanding of the boredom and the isolation, the loneliness and the physical and mental risks of their working lives. So, she brings those two things together in a beautiful way. Again, as with Persepolis and Fun Home, the drawing style is really kind of fundamental to how you read and understand the story. She makes amazing use of scale, I suppose. Like you have this sense of these huge machines, or these sort of huge spaces, and then some very sort of enclosed and claustrophobic working spaces, but in this sort of big, empty, harsh environment, and the people are kind of small in this world. It's the drawing style is quite monochrome, but it really conjures up the sort of physical and emotional sort of brutality of that world. But there's humour and humanity in it too. So an enthusiastic third recommendation from me for getting into the graphic memoir genre. If not this People April, perhaps in a future one. And as I say, always interested in your recommendations for good graphic memoirs.